Welcome to this episode of the HR Dialogues, a show where we discuss HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Dieter Veldsman, and today I will be joined by two very exciting guests as we will be discussing employee experience, a topic that has certainly been on the radar for the past 2 years. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's really great to have you with us. Both of you, give us a little bit of context. Introduce yourself to the participants today that will be listening in. Who are you? What do you do? And what will we be talking about today?
Let me start. I'm Rosa Storm. I'm a service designer at LiveWork, and I have been for roughly 3 years now. I started at LiveWork due to a graduation project where Anna was actually my mentor. And that graduation project was around the topic of employee experience.
Perfect.
So yeah, I spent half a year deep diving into all the research I could find. I developed my own models. And the goal was really to understand how LiveWork, a service design consultancy, could help their clients improve employee experience in their organizations.
No, look forward to that. Thank you very much. Anna, over to you.
Yes, so I'm Anna van Lieren. I'm lead service designer at LiveWork Studio. I actually have a background in product design engineering, but then I kind of moved into my interest into behavior psychology, what makes people tick. So I really wanted to understand more around how can we help people to change their behavior and to design services and experience that people really need and they desire. So that really kind of sparked my attention. So that's where I moved into in terms of the field. And that's how I became a service designer at LiveWork years ago. And now helping various organizations with doing service design projects, but also teaching employees within those organizations on how they can do service design.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I look forward to tapping into your wisdom. And I think as an introduction, if we look at a lot of changes have happened in the world of work over the last 24, 36 months. And I think there's been a few key things, especially in the human resources domain. We've seen a very strong movement towards a call for more human-centered organizations, which I think is a very, very positive movement that we're seeing on the one side. On the other end, we're also seeing movements such as the Great Resignation, people starting to ask the question, why do I work? What do I want from work? And what is my relationship with work going to be? And I think that's something that kind of falls smack bang into your expertise as well, in terms of what we will be discussing today. I think one of the key things that I've picked up in quite a few of our conversations is the changing employment relationship. So people asking to say, but what do you offer as an employer? And it's not just about the transactional elements anymore, reward, etc. It's a lot more about what is it like working for you? For years we've been talking about culture and we've been talking about employee engagement. But I think, in my view at least, a place where all of those different elements do come together is an employee experience, because it is really about the moments that matter. And I'd love to explore that with you a little bit more today. So let's get us started. Let's take a step back. What is service design and how does that relate to employee experience? Because I think it's important that we clarify that before we deep dive into some of your good practical examples that we'll explore a bit more.
Service design, it's we have different ways of explaining it, but the thing that usually is really helpful for people is that when you look at things around you, you see that everything is designed. So the chair that you are sitting on or the shoes that we are wearing, and they're designed with this idea of, we have particular users, they have particular needs, it will fit in within a context. So what is the best way to design that product or that thing? And the same way, and the kind of the level of detail that designers provide to designing products actually also applies to services. And when you look on a day-to-day basis, you interact with so many different services. For example, only just coming to work, you will probably have to go onto the app of the public transport to check, is my train going? Then you have to go into the station, maybe you get a coffee at a coffee place, you get into the train, you get to work. All of those things are services and those need to be designed. And that is basically what service design is. And the way we do it, it's really grounded in this human-centered approach. So we always start from the human, and that can be a customer, it can be a B2B partner, and in many cases, it can also be an internal user, so an employee. And we always kind of start with that perspective of what is the desirability that that person has? What is their need? What's their problem? How can we best design their experience? And then we try to level that with, okay, does it also make sense to the business? Is it also a viable solution? Can we actually make this into reality in terms of our processes, our systems, so feasibility? And of course, we also look into sustainability. So in terms of longer term periods of time, how does that then work? Yeah. And finding that balance is basically what we do on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. A few key things that I think is really applicable to our conversation in the context of HR. So I think there's been a very strong movement away from, and I might not be using the right terminology, but call it functional design, which is what a lot of HR processes and systems used to be designed upon. It's this principle of fastest way, efficient, cost, etc. It doesn't really matter. People have to use it. And I think we're starting to see quite a big movement, and obviously technology plays a huge role in that. But I think as well with flexible work, remote work becoming a lot more of a reality, people are asking that question around, why if I'm a consumer of services outside, I'm exactly the same thing inside as an employee. Whether it's accessing my reward statement, whether it's engaging with the actual physical working environment and workplace, whether it's a conversation with my manager, a lot of those elements as HR practitioners, we need to start thinking about in terms of how do we design that intentionally to be able to create those moments. You mentioned something that I think is very important and I want to circle back to a bit later, because it's about value for both the organization and for the employee. A mistake I often see is that a lot of people dive into it's all about the employee, and then it's quite tough to prove the business case and the value for the organization. And I think that's really something I want to unpack a bit. But before we get there, you also mentioned something around the 4 lenses of service design. What would those lenses be?
So the 4 lenses are really around desirability, which is the consumer, the customer, the employee. Feasibility, what does it say for the operations systems, maybe the employees and the frontline staff that have to deliver a particular experience for consumers or customers. Viability, indeed the business case that you refer to, what does it mean for our business? Does it really fit within our growth plans, within the strategy? Is it a solid business case? But also, what are some of the risks associated to it? And can we scale it maybe across markets? So these are the type of questions that we then look into on viability. And then last one is sustainability, which is still, I would say, a difficult one. It's not only around environmental impacts that a particular service can have, but it's also really around ethical and more kind of the world around us. What is the impact of the service that we create on the world and the ecosystem around it? And can we actually design it with the thing in mind that it will have an interaction and impact, not only now, but also in a couple of years' time? I think maybe we can design it in a way that it's actually more beneficial to the entire ecosystem than just those other 3 lenses.
I love that. We try also to position even the role of HR beyond the borders of the organization, because we believe that HR can really be a force for good on the one side, but also on the other side, we believe HR has got a key role to play in community building and in societal impact as well. And I think we're starting to see a lot more where the boundaries of organizations are starting to become a lot more blurred. We also see that the roles and the services provided by different parties become a lot more blurred. Practical example, in our own organization, we employ a lot of expats. So does that mean that the HR service does not extend to the family, or does it only end with who the actual employee is? And I think that's a practical example with regards to that. Let's talk employee experience. What's employee experience? Pretend you meet me for the first time. I don't know anything about employee experience. In simple terms, I hear you work in employee experience. What is it that you do?
That's a really good question, and I think I can talk about this one. So when I did the graduation, I had like this really formal definition, but I'm going to make it a bit more tangible in this world. So what employee experience actually is how an employee perceives their organization. So this can be about every single thing an employee does. Traveling to work can be already an example, but also accessing the systems, hanging out with the colleagues, the actual work they're doing, all this, how they interact with their organization, how they perceive that. And the most important addition is how that aligns with their expectations. Because that's a really big one. If an employee expects, for example, a long commute back and forth to work, and it is the same case, then that aligns with their expectations, and it might not have a negative impact on their employee experience, even though it's not ideal. But if they expect to have systems that work smoothly for them and that they will not spend half their day doing admin tasks, and actually it turns out to be that they do have to do that, then that's a really big impact on their experience in a negative way, because it misaligns with their expectations.
It's almost as if, and sometimes we think about employee expectations as a bit of a bank account, right? So the bank account where if the organization meets the expectation, you deposit money into the bank account, and when the organization doesn't, it withdraws money out of that particular bank account. And I think something we are starting to see a lot more, and I think it really relates to what you're saying, is that people have expectations of work. Now, whether they are expressed or unexpressed, whether they are articulated or not articulated, there's this expectation that an employee has of what is it like to work here, and that's very much informed by perceptions. And if we think about certain practices like rewards, it's not just about your salary, it's about the experience around it, and it's about the perception that you have around what value looks like for you with regards to this relationship as well. So I can definitely see the links into, in the HR world, we talk about the psychological contract, we talk about the kind of the management of the employee expectations around that. But I do think the concept of perception has to come in, because as HR, we haven't necessarily delved into that enough. I think we've gotten stuck on, but these are the facts, people should be happy. And I think that's shifting a bit. Don't know what's your view on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really big one, because often you can see that HR is really looking at it from their own point of view. Like, this is logical, they need these systems, it's just the way it is, but they stop to think about, like, what is it actually like for someone working there? How do these experiences align in a row? How do they connect? And how does that then feel for them? But really flipping that around is what's important. And something that we see in organizations a lot is, for example, that they use terminology that's really focused on how HR views the employee. So
maybe, for example, the 90-day period, like your onboarding, usually in large organizations, they always talk about the 90 days. And then, well, we did a bit of an onboarding study, and we interviewed lots of new hires, and we asked them, like, 90 days, what is it like for you? And we really understood that it's not about, oh, it's the first day, first week, first 90 days. No, it's for them around different stages in mindset. So it's about starting to, first impressions is one of the first phases, starting to identify. So the moment that they feel like, ooh, it's not me and the organization, it's us, I'm part of it, that's in the second phase. All the way to really gaining confidence and feeling like, ooh, I can do this. I understand what people are talking about. I understand a little bit of the jargon here. And we, from the kind of employee perspective, feel that those phases sometimes are more helpful to design an employee experience and the process of onboarding, for example, than looking into more of the technical of the process of 90 days.
But you can imagine how difficult that is from an HR perspective, because how do you measure if someone is already at the gaining confidence phase, or if they're still in getting familiar? And it's different for different people. So even though for the employee it makes more sense, it's very difficult to adopt that as an organization.
I think it also creates, and it demands a bit of a change in mindset, right? In terms of what is important around what we want to measure, because there's operational measures in onboarding that everybody goes through the formal training that they had to, right? Tick. Okay, we know whether they did yes or no. But I think if we start asking different questions around what was the experience of the training, did it translate into me feeling like I belong? Did it translate into me not feeling like an imposter in the organization and creating that sense of inclusion? I think the conversation shifts a little bit with regards to that. I want to come back to the point that you said that language informs perception, because I'm a firm believer that you change culture by changing language as well. And I know organizations like Starbucks, they don't talk about employees, they talk about partners, for example. And I know it's small changes, but I think people underestimate the impact and the value that has to change the way that you talk about employees, partners, and how inclusive language actually creates a much more inclusive culture where people can feel like they belong. And I think the experience design process does have a lot of that in it, in terms of what is the actual behavioral and cognitive experience that we are trying to tap into for the employee at this stage. Why is this important? So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? So I get it as a psychologist. I get it why, experience is important. You're speaking to me, I'm an actuary. Why is employee experience important?
So for the organization, it's actually, there's a lot of studies that make it tangible, and we have put a lot of focus in that to make it a convincing story. Like it has been shown time and time again that employees who are happier in the end cost less money, they make more profit, like 3 times more profit per employee, and all of that is quite nice. But it's also in terms of like, how long are employees staying at your organization? So how long are you saving knowledge in your organization? Because every time someone leaves, they take there's like 20% or 10%, I don't know the exact number, but a very small percentage of that knowledge that they have is something they can actually transfer. So in that sense, is a lot of value in employee experience. And also the employees in the end are the one to deliver the customer experience that you're trying to achieve.
I think for me that would be the most important one.
Yeah.
Because, well, we work on both sides.
Yeah.
We design a customer experience and an employee experience. And we really see that link. Like if you have an employee that feels the confidence in their job and they're happy in what they are doing and they feel that engagement, they can always kind of deliver a better customer experience as well. And that will then, of course, impact your bottom line. So in that case, I think that's already kind of the one key reason in terms of the business case on why employee experience really matters.
I'm putting you both on the spot, and the reason I'm doing that is I think as HR, sometimes what we struggle to do is to demonstrate the tangible impact that makes the conversation easy. All right. So I think if you think about employee engagement, for example, if you think about return on investment for learning, it's quite a difficult thing at times to quantify. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to quantify what the business case is that we actually forget the natural links that a lot of these things have to customer experience, to retention, to ultimate business performance, return on investment, knowledge management, etc. I think an important thing, for our listeners to understand is make the logical links and show how these things, what they look like in relation to other things that's already important for the organization. Employee experience, in my view, is not just another thing that HR needs to go and sell. I think it's already something that's there. It's just about highlighting it and making it more intentional and making it more kind of visible around the real impact that it has. And I think there's some real short-term gains and longer-term benefits that you can get out of a very well-designed employee experience. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about frameworks, and let's talk about your approach with regards to employee experience. So I'm an HR practitioner. I've maybe listened to this episode, or I've kind of stumbled across the term employee experience. Intuitively, it makes sense to me. What are some of the frameworks I need to familiarize myself with if I want to get a more in-depth understanding of employee experience?
Yeah, so I think one that is really important is the employee experience pyramid. This is a framework that I developed during my graduation. I actually looked at 6 different frameworks that were used, such as the PERMA model, the MAGIC model, the MMW model, as well as a performance pyramid, which was very from the business side, kind of. And I kind of tried to merge those models into one pyramid that shows what is employee experience. And I think what's interesting is I thought about it when you talked about the language, Starbucks calling their employees partners, because this is a thing that you can do to improve employee experience, but it's part of like a whole set of interventions you could choose. If you mistreat your employees in some way, or you're not providing the certain basic, the hygiene factors, so to call, then calling them partners will only have a backwards effect.
No, sure.
Because they can be like, you're not even paying me fair wage, but sure, call me partner. You know?
Fair enough.
So, and this is kind of what the employee experience pyramid tries to illustrate. It's based on Maslow's pyramid of human motivation. It has these 5 levels. And the philosophy behind this is basically if the needs that people have in the lower levels are not satisfied, then they will not even care about things in levels that are higher up. And very famously, the bottom one is safety, security. So feeling safe in your job, the company being transparent about struggles that they have, or knowing that you can keep your job if you want it. So not having this this thing that you might lose your job, or that you really still have to prove yourself. As long as those needs are not satisfied, they will not care as much about proper recognition or connection with colleagues, because first those most urgent needs need to be fulfilled.
Or a ping pong table,
which
is a famous example.
A famous example is indeed that one of our clients, they had ping pong. They were like, "Oh, employee experience, that's a cool thing. We should do something with that." So they installed ping pong tables. But this had this backwards effect that I mentioned earlier, because actually the employees had been complaining about not having the proper chairs to support them during their workday. So instead of being like, oh, fun, I'm having a ping pong table now, they were like, why are you investing this money in a ping pong table? Well, I need a better chair to not get back complaints.
And it points back to really understanding what the need and the desire is of, well, firstly, who the employee is, and then the need and the desire of the employee. There's a couple other famous examples as well. Don't take me abseiling as part of team building if the team actually doesn't understand each other yet. We don't know what work looks like, and the environment is not conducive to it. And I think that is a bit of a mistake that a lot of people make. They focus on I don't want to call it, work should be fun, but work should also have other things that matter. But they focus on kind of these fringe elements first without fixing the core type of things, because employee experience is very, very rooted in that employment relationship, and is it authentic? And are you delivering on what is expected of a good employer? Gets back to our earlier point on expectations.
Yeah.
How have you seen people utilize the pyramid? Is it something that comes naturally into organizations? Can they resonate with that, or what do people struggle with when you speak to them about the model?
It doesn't really come automatically into an organization. We really bring it in.
Sure.
And actually, every time we do, it makes a lot of sense. We also try to attach it to tangible examples like the ones we just shared. And then they are really interested to see how it applies to their organization. And also we've published some articles, and when people come across that, they are still it also really resonates, but it's a very abstract framework in itself. So it really needs to connect with, well, service design in our case. That's how we utilize it. And some other types of thinking and work to actually make a difference.
I think one of the challenges that we have been seeing in many organizations is that we bring in this model and people are kind of like, oh, I understand this. Like, this makes sense. But then using it in their day-to-day and putting it into practice is quite difficult, because that employee experience is not just with HR. It's not just with one department. HR might be responsible for some elements in that pyramid, but the entire pyramid sits with so many different silos in the organization. And then what we often see, mostly also with large organizations, is that those different silos do not really communicate with each other. So we have a great ping pong table, and that might be, I don't know, from HR. But then when we talk about my day-to-day job as kind of the phase that people might be in and around making promotions with my line manager, those conversations might be very intransparent. And that is completely not connected in that pyramid then. So the question is also, where in the organization do you need to bring that knowledge and that pyramid? It's not only with HR, it's actually with many different parts of the business. I think that is one of the key challenges that we see. And I think it really relates back to the challenges that we see in service design. Like when we come in and we say like, oh, we want to help you to improve or design a service. The thing is, with the service, we always try to bring that experience, customers or an employee experience. But that experience happens over time. It happens over different types of touch points. Different people in the organization are responsible for those touch points, and they do not always communicate with each other. So one touch point, one element in that experience can be great, while the others are not, and they're not really connected. And it's not really that entire journey that end to end understands how people go through it. And I think that is one of the key challenges that we also see with that pyramid and bringing that in. How can we help different parts of the organizations to have all of that same view and also agree to it, and then understand like, how can we fill in? What can we do within the level of the pyramid, within our influence that we have, to bring that forward?
I think there's a few key things I want to highlight there, because I think a lot of HR practitioners do struggle with that. The first one is, organizational design inherently at the start almost creates functional silos, and organizations need to try break that down. And I think employee experience goes against that grain quite a bit. I think we're getting a lot better with cross-functional collaboration and some newer types of organizational designs that actually introduces multidisciplinary teams a lot more. But in its essence, a lot of people do still think in very siloed process, functional driven ways, right? So I think about, let's take a practical HR example, onboarding. Onboarding, to the one end, as much as HR is the custodian of the process, they actually don't own all the elements that exists within the onboarding process. We get feedback that it's the equipment, it's the technology, it's the access to the building. It's those things that detract from that actual lived experience, so that when I ask you the question, do you feel like you belong in the organization? You actually say, well, yeah, I wasn't even loaded on your system, when I got here this morning. And I think and that's why I asked the question around the pyramid as well, because I think as HR practitioners, employee experience is very much the adoption of a particular mindset and approach towards everything that you do with regards to HR. Something that I struggle with is a lot of organizations, when they want to introduce employee experience, they set up an employee experience team, right? Which is one way to do it, but they don't necessarily think through that it has to be a bit of a philosophy that's adopted across all practices and across all those different touch points. The question for me is really around, where do I start? So what are some of the first things I need to do in an organization if I want to get started with employee experience? What would your advice be?
What our philosophy is that first you start with getting clear on kind of the triggers or the issues or the things that really drive you to start this journey of going towards a better employee experience. And I think what we're a really big fan of in our work is co-creation. And that's something that we advocate a lot, and we do a lot to get the right people in the same room to align around a vision that they can create together on how this employee experience should feel and look like. Like the very first thing, maybe to get started, like making it really practical, is actually asking your employees what their experience was. So you can get a bit of an understanding. First, it can be like just have a 20-minute chat or ask the line managers to ask around and start to get an inventory of those points that are creating issues, and then you can go from there. I think the whole issue with the silo situation is that HR creates maybe or has a vision of what this process should be and when the equipment should arrive and when the access to the building should be arranged. But the teams that need to actually enable those things don't share the same vision or weren't part and don't really understand why it's so important or what the impact is for someone who gets there on their first day and their laptop isn't there and they have to wait for a week and join meetings with their personal account. Like really make the teams responsible also kind of grasp the importance of this employee experience.
And there's a big question around that organizations are asking at the moment around what type of employer do I want to be? Because if you can align people around that concept and that idea, it's a natural outflow that, call it the principles you want to apply in employee experience design, naturally flows into the way that facilities thinks about workplaces and how marketing thinks about their internal communication campaigns to employees as well. So I think there's work to do for HR to make sure that people are aligned not just on how we do it, but why we do it. And I think we underestimate that at times. I can talk from my own experience. I've run some EX initiatives in organizations without aligning all the partners, and then inevitably something goes wrong somewhere that derails it. You made the point earlier, it doesn't help you've got 6 great touch points and number 7 just makes it, what will people remember, number 7. So I do think that there's some work to be able to do that, and I think we should stop as HR trying to explain where employee experience fits and just try and integrate it a little bit better and more seamlessly into the things that we know that we have to do, and extend that beyond HR, because let's be very honest, the percentage of time that an employee engages with HR is probably 15% of their life at the organization. And that's not necessarily where I think we can change and shift the dial of their lived experience. Let's talk a bit around some practical examples. So what we love to try and do in the HR dialogues is to make it really practical for people, and we firmly believe that we can learn from other people's wisdom around what worked, what didn't work, what would they do differently in hindsight as part of that. So can you talk us through one of the examples, and we'll delve into some of the others as we go along, of how you've helped clients with employee experience and what were some of your main learnings and what problems did you try to solve for them?
I think a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, a large international bank approached us with this question around, we have lots of turnover. Like in the banking industry, I think it's quite, they're used to the fact that people kind of move around between the different financial
services passport.
Exactly, different financial institutions. And they really noticed that within already the first year, that turnover is actually quite high. So they had this incentive to really look into the onboarding experience to understand, hey, what's happening there? Are we missing something? And how can we make it into a better experience so that we actually really keep those new hires in and we keep that talent? So that was kind of the starting point that they came to us for. And one of the things that we started to do with them is just to understand, okay, onboarding experience. We can look into that. We can look into your pain points. We can look into some of those touch points that you might have at place. But maybe we need to zoom out first to understand a little bit, where does that that onboarding experience, where does that sit within the larger experience of people that join you in the organization, and how does it move afterwards? Because within the service design mindset, we always think about the before, the during, and the after. And we usually talk about journeys that people go through. So we actually started to create some of those first journeys that employees go through to understand, where does the onboarding experience actually sit? So what happens before and what happens after, before we kind of deep dive into the during. So we drafted this based on research, talking to lots of new hires and also just employees in different types of industries and different organizations, because, well, they were interested to kind of get the best practices from other industries as well. We could create this end-to-end employee journey, or sometimes we refer to it as a life cycle. So it always kind of starts with, oh, I'm kind of interested. I'm looking maybe for a new job. Then I'm going maybe in the hiring phase. I might apply for it. Then onboarding. day-to-day job. Maybe there's a change, you get a promotion. And well, in the end, you might leave and you go through offboarding. So we kind of set that entire life cycle there, and we kind of understood, okay, what are some of the different phases that people go through? And by understanding kind of that larger picture, we could then zoom into the onboarding phase to understand a little bit better, okay, within their hiring part and in the application part, it's greatly designed. It's so seamless. You can kind of sign your contract digitally. The conversations were kind of always matched with the person's preferences. So it can be virtually, it could be in person, because they had lots of international people that are applying. And then the onboarding started. And the expectation...
Welcome. You've decided to join, now you're on your own.
And that expectation of that seamless kind of digital experience that they had in the kind of the application and the hiring stage didn't transfer to the onboarding stage. And that was such a big mismatch that we then found out. So that we kind of already understood, like, this is one of the key things to address first and to understand, like, hey, how can we do that? But also it was kind of looking into, okay, the end of the onboarding phase, how does it then continue to the next phase in that end-to-end journey? So I think one of the key things that we did within this organization is help them to set a shared framework of what that entire end-to-end process looks like, where in this case we had HR as our key clients. Where do they play a key role? Where they might need to talk to other people in the organization, where are some of the larger dependencies, and then help them specifically to zoom into that onboarding experience. And we help them to kind of set a desired state, kind of a vision for the future. Ideally, it would look and feel like this, and then they kind of started to pick out different opportunities that they started to work on.
I love that. I think there's for me, if you really want to get into employee experience and proper outside-in design, it is around also collecting data so that you don't do it based on assumptions, right? Because I think there's a very big risk that HR functions run around what we think employees want and what we think employees need out of something like an onboarding, experience. And there's other practices like performance, I think, is the one that everybody loves to hate. What does a real good performance experience look like would be quite surprising for people to really know, as opposed to what they might perceive that to be. So I think something that I take out of your examples definitely around go and test your assumptions first, go and look at the end-to-end experience. I love the fact to also look at the before component, because I think we underestimate that, especially if the before component is not within our sphere of influence or within our sphere of control. I know of another organization that did exactly the same, and what they then actually added was after you had signed your contract, they had an experience that they wanted to create it before you get to onboarding. So it was almost in that I'm serving out my notice at my previous employer, and they had one or two experiences that they created to make you feel welcome and to get you to join into the organization as well. And then I think what you mentioned, it's a continuous process because it's ever evolving, always changing. And I think it's good to have kind of touch points in place that you measure whether you are really creating those desired experiences. In this project, what surprised you? What did you not see coming when working with this client?
I would say many things, but the one that really stands out in my memory is, well, we talked to a lot of different people within different industries, and they all recently joined that company. And we went kind of in with this idea of different categories in terms of how would that experience kind of be different. So we all were kind of had hypotheses on the personas that we might have. But it turned out that it didn't really match up with their experiences. So we went in with kind of having the first people that start their first job or the experienced professional. And we had a couple of other ones. But in the end, what we really found out, just looking at the different themes that were kind of common or that were different, that were really different categories. There were not really kind of demographic elements connecting to that at all. It was way more around their different motivations on getting started with a company. So I think that was kind of, we already knew it a little bit, but it was still surprising to kind of figure out that the demographics within kind of personas, they sometimes do not really help you to understand different needs of people. And it's more around their motivations that help you to kind of categorize people in different needs and different expectations that they have. And I think we actually had it in one of our other projects as well, because we took that learning and then we kind of had the same in a different project as well.
Yeah, for a global energy provider, we also did a project and we started out with their personas that they had. And indeed, they were also demographic. 50-year-old John, 3 kids, lives here and there. And And it's a best practice, right, using personas.
Yeah.
But diving into the research, we spoke to, they were across Europe or global even. Well,
Yeah.
at least we spoke to, I think, 9 employees in 3 different countries. So I think we had England, Germany, and Romania. And what we saw was that across these countries, we could actually divide employees into 4 archetypes, that we call it. So not personas, but archetypes. And these archetypes do not relate to demographics at all. They're more about how do you approach your onboarding. Do you like take control over it? Do you research the weeks before you start about jargon in your new company? Or do you think, I will see it on the first day and I just trust my manager to tell me what I need to know? And the other way around, are you, the other axis we use, it's an axis system, is are you really about the task and the job that you have gotten and what is right in front of you? Or are you more about the people you're meeting? And in this way, you could see that even though they were wildly different in demographics, they all fit into these 4 categories. And to add to that, what helped us understand them even better was that we found out there were actually 3 different levels of onboarding. So you have onboarding in the job, like what are you actually going to do in the day-to-day? Then you have onboarding in the organization, getting to know their purpose, what kind of organization is, but also for some, it's also onboarding in the sector they're in. So if you're coming from a different sector, that's also a whole different type of onboarding. And this part we're calling situational factors. These make a difference, but again, this is not at all related to demographics. Sure, you have some people who are younger, it might usually be their first job, which also really impacts how you onboard in a role. But so there's some relation, but it's really not, you can really not say, okay, they're 28, so it always happens like this. Or they are 55, so it always happens like this. And this combination of these archetypes and these situational factors, they really helped to make the types of experience that we designed more fitting to the people actually using them.
And I think that's a very kind of crucial inflection point, right? Because I think we get very caught up in HR and the headcount report and what can we show in terms of understanding our workforce. I think it definitely serves a purpose in a particular context, but I do like the fact that when we start thinking real employee experience, you want to think about who is the user of the experience. So a lot of the things that you've mentioned, right? The outside-in perspective of it. And also, even though you try to personalize, not to necessarily generalize unnecessarily, that it gets to that particular point that it's no longer useful. Mistake I've seen in a couple of organizations is exactly what you've just mentioned, right? We have a demographic profile of who the workforce is, but I don't understand who the human being is that does the work. And that is a very strong difference that we do need to think about. And I think for HR practically, it does have certain implications on how we report, on certain things that we measure, on certain elements that do become important as part of that. I think learning and development starting to do it better. I think they are starting to go into the domain a lot more on, I'm the emerging career professional, for example, versus saying, I'm Dieter, I'm 20-something years old, it's my second job. So I think there is that combination and transition that does need to happen towards utilizing archetypes or personas in a better way. I want to shift you a bit. You had an example of more of a blue-collar type of workforce client that you worked with. The reason I want to ask the question is there's a very big myth and a misconception that things like employee engagement and things like employee experience is easy to do in organizations where there's professional services or it's an office-bound type of employee or a controllable environment. And something that we like to dispel quite a bit is that employee experiences, if you look at, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but let's say 70-80% of the workforce globally in the world is actually not in professional services. Can you kind of talk us through an example of where you've worked with a client of that nature and looked at their workforce in a very different way?
So I think this is again with the energy provider, but also with a large sports retailer. We actually worked with people that are in stores. So really kind of frontline staff, people that are not really in the office. And actually there is also not really kind of corporate communication or just not one channel to communicate with them. So yeah, we have also done work across that. So designing employee experience or an onboarding experience, not only for people within the offices in kind of the global side of things, but also really in different markets and really people that are go out there. There are of course differences, but I think what Rosa referred to as situational factors, those are more of those differences. So the fact that they do not come into the office to, I don't know, get their laptop and their phone. They might, I don't know, when you're an energy repair expert, you might have your entire kit and you go into your van and you need to go 2 different places. So of course, those are kind of the key differences which you would have more situational factors. When we look into more of the motivations that people have, we actually didn't really find key differentiators. So it doesn't really matter. Some of the technicians, they might be people that are really into control and they want to know all of the details. And before their first day, they actually already figured it out. Yeah. Well, other people might be like, oh, well, I will see. I will just meet my team and I will ask them how I need to get started. So they're more of kind of the people approach to it. So we didn't really find those key differences. And I think that's also really something that we then take with us for other clients, that it doesn't really take a different approach to designing an employee experience for either frontline staff or blue-collar workers or white-collar workers. It's about recognizing that it's a human. Yeah. And they have a context, and that might mean that some situational factors are different, but they all have expectations and motivations, and they actually can, in some cases, I think most cases, be kind of more generalized across those categories.
And I think it's a good learning for, you know, HR practitioners working in some of those sectors, because very often, due to the nature of the sector or that industry, you know, the type of HR work that gets done tends to be, you know, highly operational in nature. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's the nature of what happens. And I think then a lot of these practitioners are hesitant to get into some of these practices because they don't quite see how that's going to work here. They agree with the principles, they know it's important, but to make it really real in the context of the human being that finds themselves, you know, whether it's on a mine, a manufacturing plant, whether I'm working in energy. An example I came across a while ago, which I thought was really useful, was an organization that had a lot of drivers that had to go out, and then they had office-bound staff. But for the driver experience, they actually realized these individuals spend, you know, 6 to 8 hours in the car every single day. So when they started thinking about employee benefits, they would allocate them something like a music allowance for you to be able to select, or, you know, registrations or subscriptions to particular podcast programs, because that's actually important for that human being. But the need, which I love what you also mentioned, was still the same. Yeah. What was the need? I want to feel connected. I want to make sure that I, you know, have certain elements that also form part of my experience from a day-to-day point of view. Yeah. And I think those things are important. You know, HR needs to start thinking about who is the human, and if this is the human, what are their needs, what are their motivations, and in a reasonable way, how can we meet them and design intentionally for those different elements as well. Let's bring it back to HR. So what advice do you give to HR professionals? You engage with quite a lot of them as your clients and working with them around their employee experiences. What advice would you give us?
Yeah, different pieces of advice. So we really emphasize from the beginning that it's not the chiefs of the process of going on this journey, but that they're not alone and they don't have to go about this whole journey alone. So it's mostly about finding the right people within the organization that can make the things happen that you want to happen. And yeah, for us, it's really about start to talk to those people, start to get them in a room together. And we actually think about where, like, different parts in that journey of being an employee, where you can involve them in different ways. So a post-interview survey, you've been here 2 months, have a lunch together thing, or 1 hour a month, you have a walk-in session with leadership during lunch and you can ask your questions. And so we try to think about who the people are, and we have like a collection of things that we can do across this journey that will meet the employee where they are.
No, I love that. I think there's definitely a notion for, you know, if I can add to what you've been mentioning, is just to ask that question around how well do I know the human beings in my organization? And if I understand who they are, what do they actually do? And if I know what they do, why do they do it, right? Because I think that also guides who you need in that room to be able to, you know, to design meaningful experiences for them as well. I think something else that's also becoming really important is don't shy away from you mentioned the situational factors or the contextual factors. At the moment, a big topic is, you know, what does the journey look like for the returning to work employee or the return to office employee or the full-on remote employee? But it boils down to the same principles, right? It boils down to the same thing around how can we consciously think about including and involving the human being as part of what we think about. From my side, a very, very big thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and sharing some of the key points around a topic that I think is very, very important for us to get right as HR professionals and as HR practitioners. A couple of key things for me that really stood out, I think, is it's about the human experience. It's about understanding before, during, and after, because nothing happens in isolation. It's about meeting people within their particular context. And it's really about just infusing employee experience as an approach and infusing employee experience as a way of thinking about how we do HR and how we interact with employees, and you can't do that alone. You need other partners around the table in order to really make this meaningful. From my side, thank you very much. I really appreciate your thoughts and really appreciate your views.
You're welcome. It was really enjoyable. Thank you as well.
Yeah, lovely to be here and share some of our work in practice, and hoping that it's inspiring for other people as well.
Where can people find you? Can they follow you on LinkedIn, on the LiveWork Studio site, just to see some of the projects that you're involved in? Is that the best place?
We're very active on LinkedIn. We often post and share a lot. The philosophy that we have as an organization is to give freely, because we can always do more. And so you'll already find a lot of useful information there, as well as on our website. We often post new client cases, new things we've done. And we also have some things like, if you're really interested to know more about the service design process, we host academies where you can learn to apply service design yourself. So there's a little bit for everyone.
Yeah.
Perfect. If I can recommend everybody listening today, definitely go and check that out. Thank you very much. I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I think a lot of very useful takeaways for HR practitioners, either working within employee experience or wanting to get into the field. That brings us to the end of this episode of the HR Dialogues. My challenge to you is go and design meaningful employee experiences to make sure that we create workplaces where people want to work and want to stay. Until we speak again.